If you had to pick one structure in Burlington that generates the most questions and the fewest answers, it's probably this one. This exquisite stone building, silently lurking at the edge of the woods on Middlesex Turnpike, directly across from a sprawling office complex, looks like something from a different age and maybe even a different country. Even more strange, it's facing away from the road and into the woods. So what is this? Who built it and why here? And was this anybody's home? At last, here are the answers. John Kent was an Englishman who came to Burlington in 1850 when the town was only 51 years old. He was in the beer business and for a while owned and operated Bunker Hill Brewery in Charlestown. It was located on Alfred Street near the iconic Schrafft's building, right next to this old place. The brewery also had a retail storefront on Water Street in Boston. Mr. Kent hired a crew of Irish stonemasons to build a cottage that looked like the ones back in England. He even specified a jerkin-head roof. Now that may sound like an insult, jerkin-head, but it's actually an architectural feature. It means the gables are folded back into the main roof. Mr. Kent wanted this old country cottage to charm his second wife so she would never think of leaving him. Well, she left him soon after they moved in. And then Mr. Kent left, leaving behind his only child, Helene. When she died in 1897, she had a fortune of $200,000, which is $6 million today, but had no relatives. The money went to various churches and charities and casual acquaintances. Meanwhile, Bunker Hill Brewery was flourishing thanks to Mr. Kent's successor, William Van Ostrand. He came up with a hit product, PB Ale, which stood for Purest and Best. It was so successful in the Boston area that 11 other companies decided to market their own products called PB Ale. Well, Mr. Van Ostrand sued them for pirating his brand, and in a landmark case, the state Supreme Judicial Court slapped a permanent injunction on those 11 companies, barring them from ever using the name PB Ale. And that was a precedent-setting victory for intellectual property at the time. But it was all for naught, because in 1919, America banned alcohol, so Bunker Hill Brewery, America's longest continually operating brewery, went down the drain. Back in Burlington, the unoccupied cottage fell into a state of limbo. Cab drivers would crash there for the night. The cottage needed a responsible owner, and in 1925, here she came. Mildred Burns of Melrose. She had just divorced Robert Burns of Melrose and moved to the country, that's Burlington, with her 3 little boys, Carl, Bobby, and Jimmy. Here they are, fishing at the pond behind the home. A few years later, here's a family photo showing Jimmy on the top left with his shirt off. And that's Jimmy playing tennis on the property right across from the front door. Now it's all woods. Here's Jimmy graduating Lexington High School in 1935. Now, why would a Burlington boy graduate Lexington High School? Because Burlington did not have a high school yet. Notice the quote about powerful writing. Well, Jimmy grew up to be known as James McGregor Burns, the renowned political writer and biographer who won the Pulitzer for this book in 1971 and wrote textbooks about government, such as Government by the People, which is still widely used in colleges and universities. Here he is on C-SPAN talking about his upbringing in the stone cottage in Burlington.
Where'd you grow up?
Near Boston, in a town called Burlington, 12 miles out of the center of Boston, and in those days, so small a town, so rural an area, that my nearest chum was 2 miles away. And you go back there now to Route 128, which is where it was located, and it's completely transformed.
What was your family like?
Father was a businessman. My mother was early feminist, although she never would have used the word, very outspoken, very strong person. My parents were divorced, and my mother took me and my 2 brothers out to this little country town away from suburbia, which she hated, and she raised us herself.
Were your parents, you mentioned your mother was a feminist, were your parents political in the sense they belonged to a particular party?
Well, my father was sort of a conventional Republican, not fanatically so, but in a rather nice, quiet way, he was a Republican. My mother was all over the lot, but came out of a very Republican family. So I came out of a very Republican atmosphere.
Did you follow the same principles in those early days?
Well, no, I rebelled early, and one of my great memories is going back as a sophomore out of college, and I'm sure completely obnoxious, and there were all my Boston uncles and cousins and so on, very conservative. They were reacting against the New Deal. And I got a lot of attention simply because I sat at the dinner table making these outrageous statements that they never heard anybody make face to face. So there were and also I had differences with my brothers. There was a lot of very strenuous and sometimes very angry debate within the household.
James raised his own family in Williamstown, Mass. Brother Carl raised his in Michigan, but Bobby stayed in Burlington and had children at Kent Cottage. His 3 girls are the last people to ever live in that house. The first 2 were Claire and Tally Burns, and then more than a decade after they were born, Robert put an addition on the house to accommodate a 3rd child, Alouette. Unfortunately, a heart defect ran in this family. Baby Alouette's mother died at 59. Tally and Claire died at 35 and 40 respectively. She's the only survivor of Kent Cottage, the only person on earth who once called this place home. She lived there from birth until age 7 when her grandmother sold the property to RCA. But Alouette is not the only one with fond memories of the house. Her cousin Deborah, the daughter of James McGregor Burns, used to make the trip from Williamstown just to sleep over at the cottage with Alouette, so she has her own fond memories. The 2 cousins made this rare trip to Burlington to see the old homestead. Alouette now lives in northern New Hampshire, and Deborah lives in western Mass, so it's been a long time since they've met here. And since Burlington's town meeting has approved this condo plan for the property, this might be the last time they'll visit their childhood castle together.
I guess when we would visit, we would stay in one of the bedrooms on the right.
Yeah.
In a sort of 4-poster bed.
Yeah.
My sister and I would share a big bed.
And that was Teasla.
Yes.
And here's Alouette visiting the addition that was built for her. In fact, that was her bedroom window.
And our Christmas tree would go in that corner. That's where we would hang our Christmas stockings. I think my mother's desk was in that corner. That was a glass door. And there was a piano around the corner here. No one played. That was the dining area, and in there was the kitchen. That's a doorway to the cellar. When it was first made, it was painted this sort of flat white, and there were these little rust spots that showed through from nails or something. And that bothered her, so she went and painted it silver, which bothered other people.
And then they remembered another big part of family life here, the pond out back.
Oh, the pond. The duck pond. With Alouette's boat, the Lark. My father had ducks, and in the winter the pond would freeze, and the ducks would swim in a circle to keep a little piece of water open. And my father would sometimes go down and help out, and foxes would come at night and climb across the ice and grab the ducks. Did you have duck eggs?
I suppose we did.
Their grandmother Mildred, always poised and looking directly at the camera, was a powerful figure in their childhood and always brought home little knickknacks from around the
All
world.
over the world. She would always have some little things for us, for the grandchildren. But we would have to guess what they were first. Then she'd be, my sister and I, and would be there sitting at her feet, and she'd be here, and she'd say, you have to guess. And she'd call it a guess. That's what this activity was. And for me, it was always a horse. And she would open her hand, and there would be this beautiful glass horse from, some part of the world, and beautiful wooden horse from Africa, or a beautiful, they were just beautiful. And my sister loved giraffes, and so they were, she would have a giraffe if it were from the right part of the world. But that's one of my strongest memories of my grandmother.
And then the stories turned to the old barn.
I remember going into the barn with you, and we caught some bats, and we were examining them. And
Tio said,
and Tio said he was absolutely horrified, and he just said, "You have to wash your hands right now." It was sanitized.
not to take a whole bath because there are these little things that will eat you alive. I believed him.
Yeah, well, he was so serious. I'd never seen him so upset. He just said, "You should never touch bats." So that's a strong memory.
Yeah.
And there was also a bathroom here where the no trespassing sign.
Yeah, there was a bathroom there. That's right. Yep. Yeah, one above the other.
Makes sense.
Taking the long driveway to the house used to be a dramatic experience.
Come up this long forested driveway, you know, that I don't know, was maybe a quarter mile long or so,
It
and
was about a quarter mile long.
and it would sort of and the woods would be deep on either side, and then you'd come to this beautiful house. You'd come to the front, and there would be the lawn and the tennis court and the barn and tables and people and the pond and life, lots of stuff going on. And then instead now to just see it right by a busy highway, it just feels so exposed and I mean, I think it would be nice to have some trees planted in front of it anyway, some nice native trees, just to give it a little bit of protection.
There were brambles and vines obscuring it, and I just thought of Sleeping Beauty's castle during the 100-Year sleep.